Sodom and Gomorrah were ancient cities whose destruction is attributed to a divine act due to the numerous sins of their inhabitants. This account appears in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. Located in the ancient valley of Sodom, these cities were near the fertile banks of the Jordan River, in what is now the Dead Sea region in Israel. Cities surrounded by walls, brimming with wealth, prosperous trade, and sacred rituals. However, behind this brilliance lay a society seemingly destined for collapse. Let us explore how Sodom and Gomorrah became symbols of corruption, inequality, and unbridled pride. We will uncover the roots of this decadence, from rigid social structures to the controversial spiritual rituals that dominated their lives. Subscribe now to the B-Side of the Bible. Your subscription makes all the difference and motivates us to continue bringing stories filled with mystery and teachings. I count on you to be part of this mission. What was the world like before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah? You will discover how the luxury and prosperity of these cities fueled a cycle of excesses and injustices. Despite all their wealth, these cities ignored the most fundamental values of justice and compassion. Religious rituals, which should have connected men to God, were distorted to feed selfishness and power. And what about the subversion of hospitality, one of the most sacred values of the time? We will see how Sodom and Gomorrah transformed kindness into violence and compassion into dominance, culminating in behavior that defied the very laws of humanity. The judgment that marked the end of these cities. How Lot and his family were given a chance for salvation, but with a warning that became an eternal spiritual lesson. And what did the destruction by fire and brimstone? How far are we willing to go in pursuit of our desires? The cities veiled by time. Before diving into the grim fate of Sodom and Gomorrah, imagine a scenario that challenges our understanding of society. We are speaking of cities that, at first glance, thrived amidst the vastness of a fertile plain, like gleaming jewels surrounded by relentless deserts. According to the biblical narrative, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zor were part of an exceedingly prosperous region, known as the Fertile Crescent. These 5 cities were situated in the Jordan River Valley, near the Dead Sea's coast. The beauty of these lands was described as breathtaking, comparable to the Garden of the Lord mentioned in Genesis 13 verse 10. But what seemed like a land of opportunity and progress concealed a disturbing reality. Behind the well-constructed walls rose structures of power and belief that not only challenged the ethical values of their time, but also delved into profound questions. These cities were not merely communities, but miniature kingdoms, where hierarchy was a silent yet unyielding force. At the top were leaders who combined charisma with absolute authority. They were regarded as almost divine by those who depended on their decisions. However, this divinity was often tainted by selfish interests and alliances that sought not the common good but the maintenance of power, sustained by inequality. Below them were priests who not only conducted sacred rituals, but amassed wealth and influence that extended beyond spirituality, deeply intertwining with the political fabric of the cities. And what about the lower classes? Shepherds and farmers sustained the economic foundation of these societies, but lived in the shadow of the elite, trapped in a cycle of obligations that denied them any chance of advancement. Even lower were the slaves, without rights, without a voice, without a future. These souls were treated as nothing more than tools, often losing even their identity in a system that normalized suffering in the name of prosperity. However, it was not just the social structure that intrigued. It was the spiritual environment that dominated these cities. In Sodom and Gomorrah, spirituality was not monolithic, but a kaleidoscope of polytheistic beliefs. Each deity represented a promise or a fear. Fertility, protection, war, or even destruction. The temples, imposing and luxurious, were not merely religious centers. They were seats of economic and political power, governed by priests who manipulated the fears and desires of the people, accumulating wealth and consolidating their positions. But if one thing defined life in these cities, it was paradox. How could a society that considered itself so close to its God stray so far from fundamental ethical principles? How could they reconcile spiritual veneration with behaviors that destroyed communal harmony? As we unravel the secrets of Sodom and Gomorrah, it becomes clear that these cities not only defied social and spiritual balance, they walked a thin line between ascension and destruction. And when we view this story through the lens of spirituality, we begin to see that every element, from political decisions to the most sacred rituals, seemed to prepare the ground for something that would change their destiny. The luxury that corrupts the essence. As Sodom and Gomorrah prospered, their wealth was not just a reflection of their privileged location, but of an ambition that exceeded all limits. The fertility of the Jordan Plain was like a constant promise of abundance, allowing bountiful harvests and thriving herds to sustain their populations. The markets bustled with local products and goods from distant lands, brought by caravans that crossed deserts in search of profit and influence. The luxury of these cities attracted travelers, merchants, and adventurers from all directions. Gold, exotic spices, refined fabrics, all circulated in Sodom and Gomorrah as if the abundance would never end. But this scene of prosperity hid a dark truth. Inequality grew as the elite hoarded resources while the lower classes struggled to survive. The opulence was not shared, it was flaunted. Endless banquets took place in the palaces and mansions of the powerful, while farmers and slaves could only watch from afar, their labor fueling the excess of others. This disparity bred silent resentment and corroded the moral fabric of these societies. It was as if the brilliance of wealth blinded the inhabitants to the needs of others. Spirituality, so present in their luxurious temples, became a tool of manipulation and control. The priests, with their promises of prosperity and divine protection, encouraged generous offerings, ensuring that the common people continued serving a spiritual machine that fed on their desperation and faith. But something more unsettling lurked behind this facade of prosperity, a sense of invulnerability that made the inhabitants believe nothing could stop them. This pride was not just an individual trait, but a collective hallmark that defined Sodom and Gomorrah. And, as many spiritual stories teach us, unbridled pride is often the first step toward downfall. The question arises, did they realize how far they had strayed from any ethical or spiritual balance? Or, blinded by wealth and power, did they simply ignore the signs of their own destruction? The corrupted heart of hospitality. Hospitality held profound symbolic importance in ancient cultures. Welcoming a stranger was not merely an act of kindness, but a spiritual commandment. The visitor could be a messenger of the gods or bring blessings to the home that welcomed them. However, in Sodom and Gomorrah, this sacred practice had been completely perverted. Accounts suggest that hospitality in these cities became a tool to satisfy dark and twisted desires. Visitors were not seen as opportunities for grace, but as targets for exploitation and violence. Violent and inhumane behavior became so commonplace that any trace of compassion seemed to have vanished. One of the most disturbing episodes in this narrative is the story of Lot, who welcomed celestial visitors into his home. When the city's inhabitants learned of the stranger's presence, they surrounded the house and demanded that Lot hand them over to satisfy their wicked desires. This scene, laden with spiritual symbolism, reveals how far Sodom had fallen morally. Hospitality, which should have been a bridge between the human and the divine, had become a reflection of their absolute corruption. Yet, we must ask ourselves, was this behavior the result of conscious choices or the consequence of something deeper? What led these people to stray so far from the values that upheld their humanity? The answer may lie in understanding that the true collapse of these cities did not begin with their external actions, but with the corruption of their hearts and spirits. The fire that purifies. When the cities reached the peak of their decadence, divine judgment became inevitable. The Bible describes the visit of angels sent to assess the situation. They encountered a scene of violence, selfishness, and complete disconnection from any ethical or spiritual principles. The fate of Sodom and Gomorrah was already sealed, yet there was one final act of compassion. Lot and his family were warned and given a chance to escape, but with one clear condition: do not look back. This seemingly simple warning was, in truth, a profound lesson. Looking back meant more than disobedience. It was an act of attachment to the past, to the corrupt life that was about to be destroyed. When Lot's wife disobeyed, she was transformed into a pillar of salt, a monument to the inability to let go of what binds us. Then, God rained fire and brimstone from the heavens, consuming the cities, their inhabitants, and all the vegetation around them. Only Zor, a small, more distant settlement, was spared, serving as a refuge for Lot and his daughters. The other cities were punished and utterly destroyed, a symbolic act of purification. It was as if the land itself needed renewal, freed from the burden of a society that had lost its way. The cries and crackling of the flames echoed across the Jordan Plain. The surrounding area became an arid and barren land, marked by its high salinity and inability to sustain life. To this day, this region near the Dead Sea is known for its sterility. The eternal lesson. What Sodom and Gomorrah teach us goes beyond a story of destruction. It is a call to reflect on the choices we make as individuals and as a society. How far are we willing to go in pursuit of power, comfort, or pleasure? And, more importantly, what are we sacrificing in the process? These cities did not fall simply because they were corrupt. They fell because they lost the balance between the material and the spiritual, between self-interest and the well-being of others. When a society forgets the principles that uphold coexistence, it sows the seeds of its own destruction. As we look at the smoke rising over the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah, we are compelled to consider our own future. Are we paying attention to the warning signs in our lives? Or are we, like them, blinded by the illusory shine of a path that leads us away from what truly matters? If you enjoyed this content and want to support us in continuing to bring more insights and reflections, leave a like and subscribe to the channel now. Your subscription makes all the difference and motivates us to keep going. I count on you. Share your thoughts in the comments.